The HOA sent me eviction papers. Wait, what? Did they just threaten to kick me out of my own home? What? And it gets even crazier, because they were signed with my own blood. Yep, that's right. This happened to someone. It's crazy, but it's true. And in this video, I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, why it happened, and most importantly, how this can be avoided. So, stick around. Hi everyone, I'm an HOA lawyer. Welcome to my channel, where we help homeowners, associations, and their members understand their legal rights and respo you. Please subscribe if you want to stay informed on all things HOA law. Let's get started. So let me paint the scene for you. There is a homeowner. We'll call him Homer. Homer lives in a community which has a homeowners association. The HOA has a governing document called the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, or CC&Rs for short. The CC&Rs basically tells the residents how they must live in the community. Now the CC&Rs state that if there is a violation, that violation must be cured within a certain period of time. If the violation is not cured, then the HOA can file a lawsuit to force the homeowner to either cure the violation or to be forced to sell the property. Well, Homer has a large dog. The CC&Rs allowed for one dog under 30 pounds. He didn't have a small dog. He had a big dog. The HOA sent him a letter saying he had to get rid of the dog. Well, Homer ignored the letter. He loved his dog, and he was not about to get rid of him. A little while later, the HOA sends him another letter. This time they're threatening to sue him if he doesn't get rid of the dog. Still, Homer ignored the letter. Well, eventually, the HOA files a lawsuit. The lawsuit says that Homer has to get rid of his dog. Homer still ignores the letters. He doesn't do anything. Now, at some point, when the HOA files a lawsuit, they should have recorded a lis pendens is something that gets recorded in the public records. It basically puts the world on notice that there's a lawsuit pending which affects the title to the property. It will also notify potential buyers that there is a defect with the title, that defect being the lawsuit filed by the HOA. If a buyer wants to buy the property and they see that there is a lis pendens on it, they would have to take title to the property, subject to whatever judgment ultimately comes out of the case. In other words, if they bought the house, they'd be stuck with whatever decision the court ultimately makes in this case. So usually when a lawsuit like this is filed, a lis pendens should be recorded. But for some reason in this case, it wasn't. So now some time goes by and Homer is still ignoring the whole thing. Eventually, the HOA sends him an eviction notice. They ask him to either pay all the attorney fees and court costs or get out. Now, before we go any further, I want to say that an HOA does not have the power to evict a homeowner. Only a court has that power. The HOA did not have the power to change the locks on his house. They could not have kicked him out on the street. He couldn't have been forcibly removed by the police or anyone else. Even though the HOA might send an eviction notice, only a court can actually evict a homeowner. Well, Homer decides to ignore the eviction notice, and the HOA changes the locks to the house and kicks him out. Now at this point, this is crazy. You might think the story is over, but it gets even crazier. When the HOA changed the locks and removed Homer from the house, they taped the front door shut with tape. Now, this is where it gets really crazy. On the tape, they put the HOAS logo, and below the logo were the words, "Do not remove this tape until further notice." Below that, there was a line for the homeowner's signature. Well, when they brought Homer back to the house so he could get his stuff, they forced him to sign the tape by pressing his hand into ink and stamping it onto the paper. Then they took a picture of him signing the paper. As you might imagine, Homer was pretty upset about this. He thought he was being detained against his will. He thought he was being illegally evicted. He thought that the HOA was trespassing. And of course, he was very upset about them making him sign the paper with his own blood. But he finally got his stuff out of the house and moved away. The HOA took the picture of him signing the paper, and they recorded it in the public records to show that the HOA had the right to remove him. However, as mentioned earlier, a lis pendens was never recorded, meaning that Homer could have sold the house while the lawsuit was going on. If a buyer would have bought the house while the lawsuit was going on, then they would have taken title to the property subject to whatever judgment came out of the case. In other words, if they bought the house, they'd be stuck with whatever decision the court ultimately made in this case. Also, I doubt that a judge would have ordered that homeowner be forced to sell his house based on the facts presented here. So the recording of the picture probably wouldn't have done anything. But that brings up an interesting question. Can a homeowners association legally force a homeowner to sell their house? Generally, the answer is no. For most homeowners associations, they cannot legally force a homeowner to sell their house. However, there are a few exceptions to that rule. For example, if the CC&RS say that the HOA can force the homeowner to sell the property, then they likely can. Also, if the CC&Rs say that if there is a violation, the HOA can force the homeowner to sell the property, then again, they likely can force the sale of the property. Also, if the CC&Rs say that the HOA can fine a homeowner for having a violation and the amount of the fine is the fair market value of the property, then the HOA could force the sale of the property. Now, if you're wondering how the HOA can force the sale of the property, they generally do it through a lawsuit. In a lawsuit, the HOA asks the court to force the homeowner to sell the property. If the judge agrees, then the homeowner must sell the property. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would a judge ever force a homeowner to sell their house? Well, sometimes judges do it because they feel that it's in the best interest of the community. If there's a bad apple in the community that refuses to follow the rules, the judge may feel that removing that homeowner is in the best interest of the community. So what is the lesson to be learned from this story? Well, don't ignore letters from your HOA, especially if they're telling you to stop doing something. Not only could you get hit with a lawsuit, you could lose your home. And if you lose the case, you could be forced to sell your house. Also, always record a lis pendens whenever a lawsuit is filed. If you don't, you could end up in a situation like this, where the homeowner ends up signing a piece of paper to show that they agreed to be removed from the house. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe so that you never miss an upload. If you have any questions, please comment below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.